This may be the question that I was most surprised by the end result. What do MMO players actually want in a game? Can there be any kind of consensus, or have we fractured so much that we really don't even know what we want anymore?
You are not prepared.
Is making an MMO today just kind of doomed to fail because we have so many just diverse opinions on what we should get in an MMO? Well, that's kind of the question I'm going to answer here today. But there's a caveat to it. Over the last 2 decades, MMO players have asked for a lot of different things. And honestly, we've gotten a lot of different things. The genre has morphed and changed, and really at the behest of players. Other times, decisions have been made that were very clearly made to maximize profit while giving a big middle finger to the player base.
Do you guys not have phones?
Yeah, you guys all have phones, right?
There have been incredible success stories of MMOs that have listened to the player base and seen good impacts from that. But there have also been crushing failures from listening to the player base, and perhaps not delivering exactly what the player base wanted, or delivering them what they did want or thought they wanted, but giving them something that honestly pushed them away. The Daedalus project has been in hibernation since 2009, and while there have been other attempts at surveying the MMORPG player base over the years, from school projects to market research, we don't have a singular source that says what players want. But I mentioned a caveat because honestly, have you seen this channel? I do not have the funds to fund market research. I've got an office with a green screen that I use sometimes, which I didn't this time because it looked kind of bad. So I'm not going to be able to answer this question for every single player, for the millions of players that play MMORPGs today. So a more accurate title for this video would have been something along the lines of, what do MMORPG players want that have either watched my videos or have seen my community posts and decided that on that day they wanted to go ahead and vote on that. This title is way too fucking long for any YouTube video, and no one is clicking that shit, so I hope you'll forgive me for shifting it to a title that makes a little bit more sense. Over the last few weeks, you may have noticed a lot of community post polls from this channel, all asking different questions about MMORPGs. The question covered a range of subjects pertinent to the MMORPG genre, and each question got between 400 to almost 900 votes. This, and I have to stress this, is far from a scientifically significant percentage of the player base. But you are still more than welcome to point out all the failures of my methodologies below. Like right down there. It helps the algorithm, and the next time I do this, maybe the votes will be in the thousands. Who knows? But let's get straight into the voting and see what you said was what you wanted in an MMO. We'll start with one of the most controversial ones. Would you play an MMO with an automatic group finder? Now, when I say an automatic group finder, I'm not talking about a looking for group tool. I am specifically talking about something like what World of Warcraft added, throwing you in with a randomized group and throwing you into an instance. For many people that played MMORPGs before these came in, this has kind of been the death of the social aspect of MMOs, because you no longer needed to even talk or communicate with each other. And if you did, people could sometimes be jerks. I don't know that it's necessarily worse because of the group finder, but it is definitely not a fun experience for a lot of players. But how did the vote work out? Over the 543 votes we received, 83% of the people said yes, they would play an MMORPG that did not have a World of Warcraft style automatic group finder. 17% said no, so they would want that automatic group finder. There's obviously a clear line here, but also keep in mind that many of the people watching this video, or many of the people that have voted on this, are coming from games like Everquest, or they're waiting for games like Pantheon and Ashes of Creation, which have talked up the lack of automatic group finders, taking you back to that more social ability to find and group with people that you actually know and like, or just see in chat. Now, the next question is probably the same kind of question that was asked when World of Warcraft was coming out in 2004. And honestly, the results for this did not surprise me. Would you play an MMO with bad graphics but good gameplay? Now, there's going to be a limit on this that I could not put into a poll. What is considered bad graphics by one and what is considered good gameplay by another are going to be very personal. But generally the idea behind this question was, is gameplay more important than graphics? And as the vote showed, with 573 votes, 93% said yes, they would play a game that has bad graphics but good gameplay, while 7% all play Black Desert Online. Now this next question I really worded poorly and I apologize, so you may just throw this out completely, but essentially what I was trying to ask was, would you play a tab target game over an action combat game? Tab target being games like World of Warcraft, with action combat being more like Guild Wars 2 or Black Desert Online. Perhaps partially because I worded this so poorly, there was only 463 votes on this, and we ended up with 93% saying yes, they would play tab target if that's what they understood the question to be. I don't know how people voted. And 7% saying no, they want action combat, or maybe they want both. I really worded this question wrong, y'all. I'm so sorry. The next question was one of the most split in the voting. And this is a question that I've honestly shifted back and forth on. I have a video on here decrying the struggle of the chosen one in MMOs. But as I have continued to cover MMOs, I see the appeal for many players. The question, should you have single player storylines in your MMO? With 514 votes, we had 62% saying yes, you should, and 38% saying no. This may be the question that I was most surprised by the end result, specifically thinking about the demographic that would be answering these kinds of questions. Most of these people that are answering the question probably played Everquest, they played Everquest 2, but they also may be players from Guild Wars 2 and Final Fantasy XIV, games that are very, very single player story based, games that will bring you to tears with the potency of their storytelling. The question that got the second highest number of votes with 823 was, should an MMO have PvP? The vote on this one was still pretty split, although it's very clearly in one direction. We had 34% saying yes, an MMO does need PvP, and 66% saying no. Now keep in mind that for this question, I did not break it down into always on PvP versus something more like structured PvP. So this is not talking about a game like Ultima Online where PvP is everywhere, versus say a game like World of Warcraft where you went into a battleground. Now for me personally, I really do like to have some PvP in my game. I grew up on a lot of games that had PvP, whether it was Ultima Online, Shadowbane, Warhammer Online, or even World of Warcraft. They all had a slightly different flavor of PvP. But I also understand the players that just don't want anything to do with it. The players that are joining into an MMO for that cooperative feel, that PvE game, and that seems to be what the majority, at least in these polls, is looking for, a PvE focused game. And I know that a lot of people that talk about PvP tend to worry about the idea that if you add in PvP, even if it's structured, you're having arenas and battlegrounds, well, you're going to start balancing classes around PvP and not around PvE, which can cause issues. Our second to last vote is an interesting one. And this is the first of our last two votes that has more than just two options. We talked about the payment model. With 793 votes, we had box and subscription, like say Everquest when it first launched, or World of Warcraft, or Final Fantasy XIV now, with 60% of the vote. Then we had buy to play with a cosmetic shop, so think Guild Wars 2, and that had 22% of the vote. Coming in next with the third highest option, buy to play with optional subscription, kind of like Elder Scrolls Online, would be 12% of the vote. Coming in last, tied, was free to play with cash shop at 3%, and other at 3%. Here's some of the comments that we received on this that show what they were looking for with a payment model. And the last question I asked, which was perhaps the most surprising to me with just how lopsided it was, is what setting does an MMO player want? Now in this, I am limited to how many settings I could talk about, but when I was researching it, I was realizing just how few big MMOs have really deviated from the main setting of an MMO, that is fantasy. High fantasy specifically. So I gave a couple different options. First, we had modern and superhero. I probably shouldn't have really kept these two together, but it was the only thing that made sense to me. Well, that came in with 1% of the vote. Sorry, Iron Man.
Saved us.
Next, which might not bode very well for games on the pipeline like Blue Protocol, at least with the audience that voted on this, is the anime setting. So Blue Protocol, Tower of Fantasy, Genshin Impact, those kind of games. I think if this poll had been run by MMO Byte, this would be a very different story, but at least this audience has no interest in that type of game.
Nani?
There's a 1% vote, or at least they were not, it is not the preferred setting. Another one to come in at a very low 1%, which probably doesn't bode very well for recent released Gloria Victis, is the low fantasy setting, historical fantasy, which I'm realizing now is the genre of book I write is kind of a low fantasy, historical fantasy. Wow. So yeah, I may have made a mistake. 1%. The second highest, and one that has spawned probably the second most MMOs, Star Wars Galaxies, Star Wars The Old Republic, EVE Online, and the forever in development Star Citizen. The sci-fi genre. Well, they had a whopping 7%. 7% of the setting vote for the second highest vote. This, I think, was the most surprising because sci-fi has a very broad audience, but it makes me think that some of the games that have come out for this have really relied on the IP. If you think about it, we've had two different Star Wars MMOs. We've had a Star Trek MMO. So we've had two of the biggest, if not the biggest sci-fi genres, both with MMOs, and they have been some of the biggest ones in this genre, although EVE Online, I believe, dwarfs both of them. So the biggest winner, if you're keeping track of the math, you should know this percentage already, but high fantasy. So World of Warcraft, Everquest, I considered Final Fantasy XIV to be in this as well. Ultima Online, Mortal Online 2, Pantheon Rise of the Fallen, Ashes of Creation, really any MMO that you can think of, pretty much the vast majority of them, 90% of the vote prefers this high fantasy setting. And while that's not particularly surprising, I did still think it would be a little bit lower. I was pegging this around maybe 70% of the vote, based on the number of games out in the market that focus on this high fantasy genre. Sorry to games like Secret World, Champions Online, and games like Star Wars The Old Republic. It sounds like the settings you picked, while interesting and intriguing, still pale in comparison to being an elf. And as one final, just kind of bonus vote that did not get a ton of votes, but I still found pretty interesting. With 364 votes, I asked what would you like more of in an MMORPG? The answers were better graphics at 9%, voice acting cinematics at 13%, difficult raids at 4%, difficult group content at 42%, and solo content at 31%. Those are what at least the people watching this channel and the people that see the community posts, which can reach people that have never seen this channel at all, have voted on as what they want in an MMO. These are not statistically significant sample sizes, but it is still an interesting thing and something that I hope to revisit in the future. Thank you so much for watching. My name is Redbeard Flynn. I hope you enjoyed this video. And if you want to see a video on all the things that we'll never see in an MMO again, take a look at this video right over here. Do you hear that sound? Like the sound of childhood.